Yes.
Thank you so much for your informative lecture and all of your valuable work. I had 2 questions. One was, do you conceal your identity for security reasons, or why you have the name Elder of Ziyon? It's really interesting. And the other question was something that I had about the birthright article in Slate, that appalling article where the author, who I understand is Jewish, alleged that the birthright trip, was responsible for the death of the lone soldier Max Steinberg. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was really interesting. I didn't see any response by birthright, so it seemed like they thought, a response might draw more attention somehow to that article or legitimize it. I don't know exactly why they didn't respond. I think that was the reason. But I wanted to get your input on a strategy when you see some kind of like appalling anti-Semitic article. Do you disagree with that strategy of staying quiet, and did birthright make a mistake?
Okay, first, as far as my name is concerned, it is in my frequently asked questions. There's 3 questions you had. One is how I got my name. It's a stupid historical thing. Years ago, I was on Yahoo message boards. I had lots of different names. That's one I chose. It stuck. People saying, "Oh, we can ask the elder," or something, like whatever. So I just liked it. I'm not so much worried about security as I'm a professional and in a high-tech field. So the first thing that people would do if I'm being hired or changing jobs is they're going to Google my name, and if they see 20,000 articles that are written, and clearly the timestamps are during the day, it might hurt my chances for career advancement. So it really isn't so much. I'm not so worried about. I'm not a Pamela Geller. I'm not Atlas Shrugged. I'm not a person that I'm getting all these death threats or something like that. I'm a fairly low-key guy in what I write. I try, there's very little that people could really get super upset about. They're not happy if they're on the other side about what I'm writing, but I'm not the type of person that just gets these people, oh wow, I hate this guy. I don't get much of that. As far as the birthright thing is concerned, it is, again, every organization obviously has to do their own decision. That doesn't mean that I would go by that decision. I would have no problem. It's not a story that I covered, but I would absolutely have no problem slamming the original article about saying that, is saying, because clearly, to me the angle would be, it's not birthright that's the problem to you. The problem is Zionism, because birthright isn't saying, oh, we want everybody to go and become lone soldiers so they can get killed. Birthright is saying, we want to instill a love of Israel in you. Some of you are going to end up moving to Israel, but that's okay. But the whole point is to instill a love of Israel, and that's the whole point of birthright for people who otherwise would not have had that. So according to the person that's writing the article, the angle from them is, no, don't tell me you care about the life of this person. Don't give me this garbage, because it's obviously garbage. What you're really saying is you're against Zionism, and you're using this death as a means in order to be able to shoehorn your hate into and how disgusting that is. So that would be the angle I would use. I would have no problem doing that. But birthright has its own. They might have their own reasons to be able to do that. I'm not going to blame them at all. Yes. Go ahead. Okay, sure.
My question is, how do you, which battles do you choose? You have for those of us using social media to promote articles exposing the truth, there's a wide variety of individuals and conversations, and sometimes it's obviously clear that they are very hard-line Palestinian activists, and the amount of facts is going to convince them otherwise, and they're there with an agenda and care nothing but the truth. And there are people who are most likely just not, ignorant but well-meaning, and they're clearly open, and there's everything in between.
Yes.
People with biases, but who still want to have a conversation, and so forth. How do you distinguish which conversations are worth having?
Okay, that's a great question, and this is more my own personality than what's best for everything out there. But in short, one is I look at how much time it's going to take to do the answer versus how big the target is. So, in other words, people will send me an argument saying, oh, look, this person said something and it's terrible, can you answer back? And if the person's a nobody, then to me there's not much reason to do it. If the person is a columnist in the New York Times, then there is a good reason for me to do it, because I want to go after the good target, the juicy targets. So to me, that's where it's worthwhile to actually spend some time on it. But it's also, this is my own mishagas, is I like to be as original as possible. So if I see other people are covering it, other bloggers, are going after somebody, then I'll usually stay away, because they're already doing it. There's no reason for me to do it. And I want to be as original, and I want to be as is different is possible because I want to cover as much ground as possible. If other people are covering it, there's no reason, unless I think I have an angle that nobody else has, I don't see any reason to be able to do that. So those are pretty much what plus how much time, again, time versus target. Because, sometimes it's just, for me, it's just like, okay, I'll just dash something off quick because, again, I have this weird thing in my mind. I try to blog every 2 hours during the day. There's no real reason for me to do this, but I'm sort of stuck in the habit. So, so sometimes I'll just say, okay, here's a quick one I could put up in order to get my quota done for the day. But other ones I'll say, okay, this one I'll work on at night. I'll try for the next day. This one will involve some research. Here's some new stuff that people really haven't looked at before. So that's pretty much it. Yes.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So actually, originally my question was quite similar to Irina's. So my other question is, I find that I'm writing a lot of letters to the editors, and I mean sometimes I get replies, but usually not. Is it a waste of time compared to tweeting? The problem with tweeting is you have a very short character limit.
Yes.
And so it's very hard to get the point across in a really small, especially if it's a terrible tirade that you're responding to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's easier without a character limit to reply by email.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, how do you...
If you know the actual email of a real person, instead of just sending it to editor at or letters at or something like that, if you actually have a real person, that's very effective. That's clearly the best way to go. You have to be careful of how you write it. You have to be, methodical. You don't make sure your emotions don't take the thing, saying, here's your point, here's why it's wrong, here's why you should, from your perspective, here's why you shouldn't have done that, because it's hurting your own reputation. I mean, you have to think from their angle, because you don't want to get them defensive so much, but you're going to say, here's what's completely wrong about this, and this is why you're going to look bad as a result of it. So you're right. If you have the actual email address, I don't know the effectiveness of sending to generic, letters at or editor at. Maybe there was. I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that. I don't do it as often as I probably should. Twitter, you're right. Twitter is good for. I mean, you can point if somebody else has a longer critique. You can point to that in Twitter. You can just link to that, for example. Or there's nothing wrong with you just making your own Facebook post or making your own, writing it on somewhere and linking to that as well, and saying, here's my problem with what you wrote. Here's what, and then you could just point to your Facebook. So you have plenty or twit longer, that works too, one of those sort of services. So there's always options, that sort of thing. Yes?
I spend a lot of time combing the media, taking interesting articles and videos and posting it to Facebook. And I actually got a lot of more information from Facebook, and it was a good way to disseminate information. But I guess as the war continued, it was very similar things, different media. This is how much money goes into the tunnels. They're using human shields, or it was all the same kind of stuff at a certain point. And I found throughout the war that the media was shifting, and I realized that who was the audience I was trying to reach. Yes, I was trying to reach Jewish people and educate them, but there's also this people who were not Jewish that I wanted to kind of side with Israel and understand the truth of what was going on. At a certain point, it became an obsession. I was posting all the time, and I realized that people got the message. They understand what's going on, and they've been barred with everyone else that's posting. What I started to shift to was the ISIS, what's going on in Iraq and Syria, and trying to draw parallels between that movement and Hamas.
Yes.
And their charter, and I felt almost that it might be more worthwhile to blog about that and the persecution of the Christians, and then figure out a way to kind of tie that back and that mentality to what's going on in Israel and Hamas. Because I feel like if they could understand this, in my opinion, this movement, to get rid of Israel, the infidels, then they could really be more unified, as opposed to them thinking, okay, this guy's Jewish, he's very pro-Israel, this is his own bias.
Right.
What do you think is the most effective?
No, that's an extremely effective method. There's absolutely, because the fact is, I don't know about ISIS specifically, but because I don't, but assuming that it's from an Al-Qaeda offshoot or something like that, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, all are from, are descendant from the Muslim Brotherhood. They're all, Sunni organizations that were all originated from Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood in the 1940s. So it's a reasonable thing to say. There's really no difference between the two. As a matter of fact, once I made a poster saying, there's no difference, showing a Hamas leader and showing Al-Qaeda, showing bin Laden, and saying, okay, here they are, they're both anti-Semitic, they're both kill people for no reason, they're both terror, tell me what the difference is. And then a few weeks later, I saw on some other place, I saw a poster in Gaza showing the same thing. It was a poster that not showing, here's a picture of bin Laden, here's a picture of the original founder of Hamas. And I'm saying, hey, these guys are ripping me off. It's they admit it. Hamas admits that they're like Al-Qaeda. They're, in Arabic. So it's a certainly an effective, it's a very, again, there's going to be pushback, but it's an extremely effective method. And it's true. I mean, there's really no difference. The Hamas, the Hamas charter doesn't say we want a Palestinian state. It doesn't say that. It says we want to be part of the entire large Muslim ummah, the Muslim world, or something like that. A state is a means of being able to go that way. We want to be able to have Israel kicked out, so from that way is a state. But their interest is a caliphate, the exact same thing that the Islamic State or ISIS is doing in Iraq. It's an exact analogy. So it's an extremely effective thing to do. You have to be able to point these things out. Lean heavily on memory because they have all the videos, all the translations, as well as Palestinian Media Watch. You can make absolute. It's a complete analogy as far as that's concerned. I mean, it's not 100%, but it's very, very close when it comes down to it. It really is. And the only reason that there's so much sympathy for Hamas right now is because people are anti-Israel. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. There's very little difference. Hamas is not interested in governing. They're not interested in a state. They're interested in kicking out Israel. That's their entire point. But there's an exact analogy between them and ISIS. Absolutely. Yes.
Two questions. First is what's a good way of dealing with the issue that when Hamas was founded, Israel found it useful to support them as a means for weakening Fatah?
I never actually researched that. I've seen people say that. I don't make opinions unless I really actually spend the time researching it. So I've never really had a chance to do that. I find it a little bit silly. It just sounds hard to believe. But again, I'd have to look. I can't say it categorically because I'm not going to say, oh, it's a lie because I like doing things myself. So I don't trust anything that anybody says unless I see it. So so I don't know. It seems unlikely to me because there was always an undercurrent of Islamism even in Fatah, even with Arafat. So it seems weird to me that they would have done something like that. It just, again, it doesn't gel in my head. But I can't tell you specifically because I don't argue with something I just don't know.
All right.
Yes.
The second question is, on Facebook there's a huge proliferation of these basically genocidal groups calling for extermination of Jews.
Mm-hmm.
I have tried reporting a number of times when I see them that they are violating the Facebook terms, and
Mm-hmm.
usually the response I get automatically from their system is we're reviewing it, and then a couple of days later they'll tell me there's nothing wrong.
Right.
Miraculously, 3 days after the last one that I reported, they came back and said we double checked and we decided you're right, and we eliminated the group. In your research, have you found anything that explains what their criteria are?
I don't know about the specific criteria. There are people that are experts on this. I think the guy's name is Andre Oberler. I know I tweeted it today, but I tweeted a lot of things today. But if you go through my tweets today, I did tweet to a website that specifically does exactly what you're talking about, fighting anti-Semitism on Facebook. They tell you every step of the way what you have to do. And it makes sense to do it as a coordinated campaign. Because usually an individual isn't going to be able to do it so easily, but when there's a coordinated campaign, Facebook takes it much more seriously. And for the really, really bad ones, it's sometimes worthwhile to grab the attention of the Simon Wiesenthal Center because they take him very seriously. So you can't water down his influence, but when it's a really bad one, sometimes you just get to Jewish organizations and they'll be a lot more sensitive to something like that. But there are groups that do this sort of thing, and again, I just don't remember the name of it, but it's I know that there's at least one group that's out there that's doing this. So look at my tweets for today and you'll find it. Sorry, yes.
A couple of things I wanted to reply about how do you reply to someone who says about
Hamas being from Israel.
So I looked into it, and it was not really support in the same way that America didn't really support Al-Qaeda early on,
Mm-hmm.
but gave some form of sort of support. But anyway, the reason obviously was that their conditions were different in the 80s and maybe they
course.
misperceived things.
Sure.
But using the logic of those people, and this is what you should say, then that should mean that America should support Al Qaeda today because they provided some level of support in the 80s against Afghanistan, against the Soviets in Afghanistan.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's a very good argument.
Literally an exact comparison, and that's what I tell everyone.
Right,
every
yeah.
time. But anyway,
Yes.
I had some questions. So my first question is, do you find that saying that you're more, I've changed it because now I say pro-Palestinian humanity, anti-Palestinian cause, but do you say that you're more pro-Palestinian than the anti-Israel people, that helps as an argument? I haven't found that it usually helps that much. That's the first thing. And the second is, I found that my way I've done Israel activism on Facebook and elsewhere, I know I have changed some people who've actually told me I have, but I worry that if I post too much, then I annoy people more than help. So, like, how do you sort of make the right balance there?
Well, again, Facebook is not my thing, so although everything I do is automatically posted there, but it's I don't understand the mentality of Facebook quite that much because it's a much more personal thing what you're describing. So I don't know about whether it bugs people or not. I can't tell you. So that's a hard thing for me to say. So, if people are telling you it bugs you, then you can react. And your first question? Sorry, I was going backwards.
Okay, so do you think it's a helpful argument?
Well, the help as far as that's concerned, it's sort of a sticky argument to say you're pro-Palestinian, but if it's for a specific case in which you say, I'd rather this person be alive, it sounds like you really want that person dead. Something like that I think is more effective to do it that way instead of just saying I'm more pro-Palestinian than you are, because that just sounds like it's okay, yeah, right. But if you say, I seem to care more about this person's, well, again, like this, what I've been talking about today, even though the circumstances seem to have changed, but, Sky News was talking about the paralyzed girl in Shifa Hospital, and it looked like, I'm not 100% sure of this anymore, but it looked like the Shifa hospital officials were purposefully keeping her in the hospital and not bringing her to Israel, and blaming Israel for not bringing her in. So, for something like that, you say, Israel's willing to let her in. Israel clearly wants to save her life. Israel has interest. Israel has more interest in keeping the Gazans alive than Hamas does. So that's not a bad argument. I'm not saying I'm pro-Palestinian, but saying Israel has more interest in, Israel has no interest in killing civilians. Israel has a counter interest. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't help them at all, and it only hurts. And Hamas has an interest in killing civilians. So for that sort of side, you can certainly do things. Yes. Yes.
One thing that I was appalled at was the Charlie Rose interview of Khaled Mashal, and I just wanted to get your opinion regarding this interview. Is there anything like as a community and as a response that we could have mobilized? Because I just thought it gave him a lot of legitimacy as a terrorist to be interviewed and embraced by Charlie Rose. In fact, the producer tweeted a picture of Charlie Rose shaking his hand. So I just wanted to get your input on, these interviews with mainstream, and this was, I believe, PBS, which is probably funded by the U.S. government.
Sure.
So, I just, what can we do to protest that?
It's, the protest, they're not going to care about protests that much. They're going to say, hey, we're generating news. What you have to do is, right, but what you have to do is embarrass them, because say, here's the questions you should have asked. There's a million questions you can ask somebody, that's from Hamas. There's tons of videos from memory with even what he's saying. He says, he's reasonable, he's willing to accept, 1967, like he says all of this stuff, but in Arabic he says very, very explicitly, there's never going to be an acceptance of Israel. There's no, there's a ton of things, plus things that other Hamas officials say about blood libel or whatever. There's one thing I'm working on, and I'm hoping to find the right singers for it, but so you guys are the first to hear. But I'm working on a joke music video that would be what does Hamas say, to the tune of what does the fox say. So and I have the lyrics already written, and as I said, I'm trying to find the right singers. But but what I'm putting together is, and there's going to be like a meta part to the song. But the point is, like, everybody's like, what? Like, the point of the song is people don't really know what Hamas says, and they're saying, they look like they're on TV. It looks like, but here's what Hamas says. The whole point is, and they'll be pointing the actual quotes. Massacre the Jews, massacre the Christians. I mean, they're saying the stuff. It's exactly explicit. So that's what has to be said, so don't coddle somebody in an interview. It's crazy. So, however you complain, but you have to, first of all, do it ahead of time as much as possible, if you know that the interview is coming. But yes, of course you should slam them. 100% you should slam them. It's crazy. Of course. Absolutely. So, how come he did not answer this question? How come he didn't ask this question? How could he possibly do an interview with a terrorist who said X, Y, and Z and not ask him about that? Would he have done that if George Bush had said something like that and you wouldn't have asked that question? How can you possibly do that? It's crazy. So yeah, look up the exact things that the guy said and say this is, you don't know how to interview. You're not a good interviewer. You're just, you're just a sycophant. You're just, whatever. That's of course they should be slammed on that. And that's endemic throughout the media. They're just so, oh wow, we finally got the get. We got the interview. We're so happy, and it's nuts. So yes, they deserve to be shamed because that's not journalism. But you do it from their perspective, because he's claiming he's a journalist. He thinks he's doing a wonderful job, and you're saying no, you're doing a terrible job. You're doing the exact opposite of what journalists should be doing. That's the point you have to hammer. Because that's what's going to scare him. When you point to journalistic standards and you point to PBS's own, words in which we say because everybody has standards that are printed, and they say, our interviews are fair and impartial, and we've got to, we're not biased. And you say this, you just violated your own policies. That's what you have to point out, because then they can't ignore that, or can't easily ignore that. They can, but it's hard for them to do. Yes. Actually, hold on. Let me guess that's somebody who I haven't asked. Yes.
I'm just curious what you think about the current state of coverage right now. I think within the last week or so, I know you said too little, too late earlier, but there definitely, I think, has been a turn. One of the big moments was when the NDTV video went viral.
Sure.
But do you think we're in a more comfortable, maybe not comfortable, reasonable place now?
It's a bit more reasonable. I think that the main problem has been, and again, there's another 800-pound gorilla in the room besides the media, and that is Israel's own, apparatus in order to be able to get the information out. The IDF spokesperson, the foreign ministry, and that sort of thing. They've been driving a lot of the coverage, and they've been doing a good job for the most part. Their biggest problem has been speed, and it's, again, they're going for accuracy. I can't blame them, but the biggest problem has been, there's a bomb, kids are killed, it takes them hours to be able to say what really happened. And that's, and I don't have a good answer for that, but that's really, so what has to be done, it's been better, you're right, but the reason it's better is because it's been a ceasefire. That's, they have less to talk about. So it's, when they don't have the dramatic pictures anymore, so now they can step back and we still have these reporters there, plus the reporters, there's a lot of them are moving now to Iraq to see what's going over there. But it's but it's somewhat better, but the reason is because Israel, there aren't as many incidents. That's really the reason. I don't think there's any sea change of really what happened yet. Yes?
My question has two parts.
Sure.
The first is, what do you think is the value of trying to take down, all those hate groups that are just going to pop back up under some different name, versus kind of encouraging the law enforcement to follow and surveil these groups? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is calling out elected officials on their voting record versus in terms of the aid that they're giving to that goes to Hamas, especially the State Department that has its own budget. That is not, that they don't really need to get a vote on.
You mean as far as aid being misdirected or something like that? Because obviously the State Department isn't.
Aid, the state system, just general,
Yeah.
What do you think is, the best approach to that?
Yeah, as far as the hate groups, that's sort of like a case-by-case basis. It's taking them down, obviously if they're gaining followers on Twitter, there's no reason to keep them up. So it's whack-a-mole. What can you do? You knock them down as fast as you can. You can't just leave them there. There's no choice. Yeah, they're going to jump. They're going to pop up. We know they're going to pop up, but at least they're going to pop up with no readers the next time. It takes a while for them to gain the audience. So that's what you have to do. As far as the politics are concerned, luckily Congress is still pretty good. There's and that's usually a good angle in order to be able to get this sort of stuff, because the State Department is a little weird. But but you certainly have, you have to stick with fact because the State Department's they try really hard to be able to, to say their statements in which they fit through a weird line to be able to not say anything. They're very, very careful as far as that's concerned. And so the best thing is when there's a good reporter, in the briefing, in the State Department briefing, usually Matt Lee of AP is the greatest one, and he'll just hammer away at them and saying, what you're saying makes no sense, until they finally give up. But it's a little harder to be able to get after the State Department because these are professional diplomats. They're not going to be able, to you it's clear something like that happened. They're saying, yeah, we said we condemned the Hamas rockets. We said, that's just a hard job only because this is what they do. But it's a reasonable angle to stick with local Congress people, local senators, because those are the ones that really will listen to you. They're, you email them, they definitely, that stuff is very important to them. If you ever visit Washington, visit them in person. You can make an appointment, they'll talk to you, or certainly their aides will. And you can get a lot of stuff done that way. That I think is the easiest, write letters, listen, they always work. The emails, it all makes an effect, and in the aggregate it makes an effect. If you get your friends to do it, it works much better as long as it's not a form letter. So it's certainly, there's something there. But the State Department's a little bit harder than, because they're not elected. It's a little bit harder than elected officials. Yes?
This notion of the blockade, you were talking about international law
Mm-hmm.
and debunking, these myths about,
Yes.
What's valid.
Mm-hmm.
So this term, the blockade or the occupation, you hear the Hamas PR spokespeople using those terms a lot and the media.
Yes.
So I just want to ask you about that term blockade. Is that, also...
Sure.
not-
Blockade has a very specific meaning, and there is a blockade, naval blockade. A blockade means a naval blockade. Israel has a naval blockade. There are very specific rules on how to do it, and Israel covered all of those rules when they declared it. They have to declare it ahead of time. They have to tell the shippers ahead of, the shipping ahead of time. You can't go here, or we're going to do this and stuff like that. That is a perfectly legal thing to do. And the UN report, after I believe the Pillar of Defense said that explicitly. They said we have no fault with what they did to the blockade. It's 100% legal, assuming that Gaza is not part of Israel. If Gaza is occupied, it doesn't work. But if Gaza is occupied, then Israel has the right to do that sort of thing anyway. But they said no fault with it. That's a perfectly legal definition. Saying the full things of blockade on Gaza is meaningless. So because it's just a word, it doesn't mean anything. So yes, there are limitations on what people where people can do it. Like I mentioned before, there are some things here and there, but they can do it. There's, I went to Kerem Shalom. I spoke to the guys. They say people are bringing in jacuzzis. People are bringing in BMWs. There's stuff. Anything can go through Kerem Shalom. It happens. We asked them, why don't you take pictures? It would be a nice thing. But but the stuff's all there. There's really no limitation as long as they're willing to pay. The whole thing that happened with the fuel. And this is so cynical, and I documented this very well. Hamas was smuggling fuel from Egypt when Muslim Brotherhood was taking care of Egypt. Egypt's fuel is subsidized, so they were paying very low prices from the smugglers because the smugglers were getting it from the government, and the government was subsidizing it. So Hamas was very happy. So Hamas says, we don't need fuel from Israel anymore, where we'd pay market prices. We're getting it from Egypt. They even converted their power plant to run on ordinary diesel instead of industrial diesel in order to be able to get this cheaper fuel from Egypt. What happens? Muslim Brotherhood gets kicked out. Sisi comes in. He starts closing all the tunnels. He stops all of this stuff. So Hamas is pretending, now we're under a blockade. Now Israel's not giving us. No, Israel's saying we're willing to give you whatever you want. You got to pay for it. But we have deals with the PA and how it has to be done. You have to go through certain paperwork. It has to be done a certain way. But it's all there. But Hamas was saying, we're going to wait. And Hamas waits until the fuel runs out. Then they take pictures of kids with candles, and then they say, look, we're under the siege and stuff like that, and the people and the reporters are falling for it. But usually it's not so much to pressure Israel. It's usually to pressure Egypt and Qatar, because Qatar will end up paying the money in the end anyway. But it's just a cynical thing that they have. They can get all the fuel they want. When I was at Kerem Shalom, they were increasing the size of the pipes just because they're saying, hey, because Egypt had just closed down, so they said, we know there's going to be more of demand, so we're adding to it. It's built that it can handle all of Gaza's needs all year. Kerem Shalom is built to that size. You don't need the other crossings anymore. Nahal Oz and all this stuff they closed. They made Kerem Shalom big enough that it can cover whatever, even with a strong economy. If Gaza's economy ever comes in, if it's growing, Kerem Shalom can handle it. And nobody talks about this. It's just...
How do we get reporters to
I don't know. Exactly. I went there. It's not that hard to get an appointment there. It was a fun interview. But it's we need to get them there. I don't know how. You just have to shame this. Why don't you go to Kerem Shalom and ask these questions? It's crazy. It's just I don't get it. Yes.
Well, first I want to thank you for coming here, and what you're doing is, taking up a lot of your personal time, and we should be indebted to you. So my question is about the reporters that are on the ground in Gaza, and it's about 500 reporters. And of course the criticism is that they're not doing independent verification, they're compromising their journalistic standards, but let's be honest, they're being threatened with physical force, and if they really report the story, they're going to get shot.
Mm-hmm.
So you can make the argument that what they should be doing is smuggling the footage through inspections, and then when they get to their home base, then they can air the footage like that Indian reporter did.
I think you could do it easy. I think it's easier than that. I think what has to be done is, and this is a journalistic, this is journalistic ethics that's at stake over here. They can do their reports, as what it is. But before their reports are introduced by the producers back in New York, it should be said, keep in mind that they are under restrictions on what they're allowed to say. In 2006, there was a photo op that Hezbollah did during the war, in which they set up ambulances, that were there, and they were and they had it all lined up, and they told the reporters, okay, now you can start filming, and then the ambulances all start rushing off as if they're going to pick up some injured kids and stuff like that. And the reporters all took pictures, and they took camera, everything like that. Anderson Cooper was there, and he said, you should all know this whole thing's a scam. He said it on the thing. He wasn't afraid, because he was big enough that he could do it. He said, you should know this whole thing's staged, there's no injured people, all of these ambulances are just doing it for show, Hezbollah set it up. It can be done. Not everybody can do it, but it can be done. But to me, what has to be done is it has to be told to the audience that's saying it automatically. The reporter can still be safe. He can say, hey, we don't know what's going on in Gaza, but keep in mind that they're showing what Hamas allows them to show, and they're not showing what Hamas does. They say it for Israel. They say it that when Israel censors stuff, Israel has a military censor. They also say, our report will fall under military censorship. They'll say that. So why can't they say it about Hamas?
Yeah, I just, in terms of best practices, you can't really, it's hard to imagine an industry burning that bridge by airing, even though the airing takes place.
For next time and stuff like that. No, you're right.
It's hard to imagine.
You're right, but you have to shame them. Again, they're supposed to have their own standards. Listen, are you a reporter or are you a propagandist for Hamas? Make your choice. If you're telling us that that's that important to you, let us know that ahead of time. Make the decision transparently. I don't care whatever you do, but make sure it's transparent. Don't pretend that your coverage is completely honest when you're not willing to actually go out on the limb and do this for whatever reason, maybe a valid reason. But let us know. That's all I'm asking, and that's it. And they should agree with that. How can they argue with that? Being transparent. So. Anything else? Okay, one more.
I just wanted to mention about one thing. You mentioned about what they did with the power plant. So I know in the past Hamas has dug up pipes of their sewers, which literally causes Gaza to be covered in a river of crap.
Yes.
And then they actually cry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, look at them, we don't have good sanitation facilities.
Yep.
Or Fatah, the moderate, where they do all sorts of things to jeopardize the water treatment facilities. And so there's a water shortage in the Palestinian Authority.
Sure.
And Israel's invested all this money in the water technology, and then they just trash it all, and then afterwards they blame Israel.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, is it helpful to say that they're kind of similar to a child who kills his parents and then
the definition of chutzpah.
Right, and they go to the court for sympathy because they're an orphan.
Obviously. Both of those cases, I'm not sure how similar the two cases are exactly. They're somewhat similar. Hamas was, I don't think they can do it anymore because I'm pretty sure all the pipes that Israel ships in are plastic. They're still helping a thing, but they're just no longer doing the metal pipes because clearly Hamas was building these rockets out of them. Looks like Hamas is building plenty good rockets now without all of that anyway, so I'm not sure if how much it matters anymore because, they are, Iran gave them all of the blueprints for building these things that can reach Tel Aviv. But absolutely, it was ridiculous. But then, that can easily be publicized. The other water thing hasn't been publicized nearly as much. The big problem is and it's not just it's more of an inefficiency type thing, but they are, Israel's offered to them, and they're saying, Here's the aquifers you're allowed to use. Here's the wells you're allowed to use. If you do all this together with us, then everybody's going to have enough water. And you're not using those, and that's not being publicized nearly as much. And again, that's not a news report type thing. It's a hard thing to report because it's just complicated, But the fact is, Israel spends so much on conserving water. And and finding where the holes in pipes are to be able to stop it quickly, doing all that sort of stuff, and the Palestinian Authority is not showing any interest because they're saying we can complain. It's all Israel's fault. They're not giving us the right water. So that it's a tough thing to cover for a news organization because it is complicated, but it's really, really important because it is extremely deceptive in the end. But and it's such a people think water, they're being, deprived of water. It's all garbage. It's not true. It really is all their own fault, or, mostly their own fault, because they have, under existing agreements, they would have enough water for what they need, and it's their own inefficiency. But it's some of it's cynicism, some of it's laziness, some of it's corruption, who knows? But there's no easy bad guy to point to the way you can with a rocket. So, a little tough. Yes?
One thing I wasn't having clear on in the news was whether or not the killing of the 3 boys by Hamas was like a deliberate act of provocation to start this whole war, or were those rogue? I'm saying, was that like an organized strategy by Hamas, or were those just like rogue terrorists who did that on their own?
It's neither. The latest report, I believe, Avi Issacharaf of Times of Israel, he said it definitely came from Hamas in Gaza. They know the chain of command that actually gave it, but it wasn't to start a war. The reason, I believe, I didn't read the whole article, but my understanding is this all happened right after the unity government was announced. And my guess is Hamas has been trying to, they want to exert more influence on the West Bank. They already have Gaza, and everybody says, unity government, the PA is going to be, and Fatah is going to be moving in and taking over Gaza. Hamas looks at it the other way. Hamas is saying, here's our opportunity to be able to, to increase our influence in the West Bank. And if you look at the last elections, most of the cities in the West Bank, not all of them, most of them ended up voting Hamas. So they don't have a small, it's not a theoretical question over here. They have a serious amount of influence and they can get a lot more. So I think they're trying to, if it would have been a successful, and again, this is my opinion, I can't say I know this 100%, but if it would have been I believe it was a botched kidnapping. They didn't want to have 3 people. I think they only wanted to grab 1, and when it turns out the other 2 kids showed up, it would mess them all up, and they got nervous. But if it would have been a successful kidnapping, all the Fatah people, the entire West Bank, everybody, especially if they would have gotten if it was more than a 16, if it was an 18-year-old, everybody would have supported it. The entire Palestinian population across the board would have supported it. And Hamas would have reaped all the benefits. They would have taken credit immediately for something like that. So that would have been a huge political win on them, because that's how they get their prisoners back, is from kidnapping. So that, I think, is what their intention was. They wanted to kidnap 1 person, preferably a soldier, but a settler is almost as good as a soldier from their perspective. They wanted to hide them. They had it set up. It was clearly planned, and they wanted to bargain for the thing. It got botched. So that's why they're saying, it's a rogue, this and that, and all that. It's not. But it was Hamas. It clearly was Hamas, but it was nothing to do. They didn't want a war out of it, and they wanted to bargain. That was it. We're pretty much pretty late.
The people who work here have to eventually go home. So if you have any questions, how can they reach out to you? Are you going to hang out?
You good? I'll hang out a little bit, sure.
Okay, so you can talk to him personally while he's here. Please enjoy some wine and cheese. And thank you for coming.
Thank you.